All right, in it. Let's have another conversation, which is when I say conversation, that mainly means lengthy monologue from me. Sorry, it's not one of those videos where I just talk, but people seem to enjoy those videos. At least certain people do, and judging by the number of views they get, they seem to be quite popular. Maybe reviews are not as popular as they used to be. There's so many reviews now. Anyway, it doesn't matter, and don't worry. Yes, I will continue to be doing reviews for the foreseeable future, but change things up. I'll just talk about some topics. And one topic I was asked to talk about is pen repair. That was the entirety of the comment. Can you talk about pen repair? I can certainly try. Pen repair is a complicated topic for two reasons. One, it is a very broad topic, and two, I do not engage truly in pen repair. Having said that, I do think I can talk about it a little bit because I have done some very minor pen repair in the past. So let's talk about that first. What do people mean when they say pen repair? Well, in my mind, typically that term refers to the restoration of vintage and classic fountain pens. So older pens that no longer work, that you restore, often the filling mechanisms of, or do other things too, so that they can once again work the way they're intended to work. When I say do other things too, you can think, for example, of a nib that has lost its tipping, maybe on one tine, maybe on both tines, and you can weld that tipping back into place. That requires a micro welder. I'm not saying this is easy. It definitely requires specialized equipment, but there are people, I think, for example, of Greg Manuskin in the United States who've kind of made a profession of that. Nib re-tipping. So that is another thing. Now, I think for most people, when they talk about pen repair, they refer to such things as putting a new sack in a pen, a vintage pen that uses a lever filler, or maybe putting in a new lever box, or a new J-bar, things like those kinds of operations. In other words, you start off with a pen that has, in principle, let's say, a decent body, a decent nib, a decent feed, but what really needs to be done is making that pen take up ink again because that no longer works. Now, resacking pens is something that is not particularly difficult. It can be a little challenging to separate the section from the barrel, but it is usually possible. Then you have to measure the size of the nipple to take out the old sack parts, which are often ossified, and it's supposed to be a rubber or something, and it petrifies basically, and you just get hard bits of rubber that you have to scrape out of the barrel sometimes because there was ink in it when it was put away, etc. These kinds of things. You measure the size of the nipple, you buy a new sack. There are online resources. It's very easy to Google. This is not a major challenge. You Google pen sacks or pen repair, and then you find that, and then you put the right size sack on it again with a bit of shellac, and then that's often a large part of the problem solved. But there are other things that are a bit more complicated. That can be a matter of those lever fillers have a lever that you kind of put like in the barrel, you put your nail under it, you lift it up, and that kind of puts a bar on the inside that moves, and that can then compress that latex or rubber sack, and then when you let go of that lever, that pressure is relieved, and then that sack expands and that draws up ink. Those kinds of levers can break, and they come in a little lever box. You can purchase often new lever boxes, and putting those in, I've done that too. That can be a massive pain. It's not easy to do that. Then you have specific bits of metal on the inside, sometimes called J-bars because they look a bit like a J, that kind of go around the sack, and then with the open end of that J, so what would be the top of a J, right, near the nib end, that are also aided in, sorry, that work, sorry, by compressing that sack. Those bars can break. You can often buy replacements for those. So in other words, that I think is the relatively simple stuff. More complicated stuff can be to fix more specialized filling systems, like for example piston filled pens. Well, you may have to take out the entire piston unit, a piston rod, put in often a cork. In traditional pens, the piston seals were cork and not nylon or plastic, whatever is used now. That means you need to cut cork, find cork in as close to the proper size as possible, drill a hole in that, get that attached to the piston rod. These kinds of things. That's more complicated. And then there is, in my mind, even more complicated stuff, of which I can give two examples. There is repairing actual broken parts in a piston, for example, a piston rod or a piston casing. That can be complicated, and I know that some people do that by taking ebonite and putting it on a lathe and creating a whole new part. These days, what is becoming more popular, which is fascinating use of the technology, is 3D printing those parts. My main man William did that for an OMAS 360 that I had, where he just printed a part of the piston that broke and put that in, which was really awesome. So I mean, that is another nice application of that technology. But of course, that does mean that you kind of need to know what you're doing. Either own or have access to, know how to operate a 3D printer, know how to create that part so it can be printed. I have no idea how that works, and I have no real interest in learning that, because picking up 3D printing is not something I intended to do anytime soon. But I mean, you need to do that. Or if you actually do this the old-fashioned way and you turn these parts on a lathe, you need to have access to that and need to know how that works and all that stuff. So that can be more involved than just resacking a pen. I mean, if you watch a couple YouTube videos, for example, resacking a pen is really not difficult. That is something that I think everyone, irrespective of skill or DIY levels, can do. I am definitely not a DIY type person, but I could do that. So if I can do that, then you can also do that. The final thing I will say is so now I've talked about nibs, I've talked about filling systems. I think another important repair involves cracks. Now there, things become complicated. Old celluloid pens, or for that matter, modern acrylic pens, you could have a crack. Now the simplest way to deal with a crack is to put something like super glue on it, and hope that that'll do the job. But there are people who have, or resin, some people fill cracks with resin. I've seen that happen too. What's very interesting is that there are people who have more or less perfected chemically fusing cracks in vintage pens. And I want to say, I don't know if he still does it, but I want to say that Ron Zorn, Z-O-R-N, or if you prefer Z-O-R-N, I want to say that he is one of the experts. I just used past tense because, again, I don't know if he still does it, but he is one of the experts in that specific field. I have not seen his work, but I've read many great things about it. And I do think that you see something. It's not that the crack is magically gone and the pen looks as new. You will see something, but at least that crack is fused. And that's obviously very cool. That too, that's a skill that involves specific chemicals and things like. I mean, that is something that has a learning curve. Let's put it that way. That's a nice bit of modern parlance. It's a steep learning curve. So I mean, that is something that I would say you really have to devote some time to and kind of know what you're doing so that you don't melt down a pen. Okay, so in 9.5 minutes, I have tried to cover, I would say, some of the more common repairs. I'm not talking about specific things like exchanging nibs. I mean, often on a lot of modern pens, nib units screw out. You can buy other nib units. Some people make the nibs in-house, then things can be a little bit more complicated. than if you would have, you know, a nib that just screws out. It's just a Bock or a Jovo nib. You can just unscrew them and you put in a new one. When nibs are made in house by companies like Aurora, then you have to have an Aurora nib. You have, you know, so that becomes a bit more complicated. But I mean, that's a matter of often not an incredible amount of work. And the same thing goes for maintenance, basic maintenance on, say, a piston, where you gain access to your piston and you put some silicone grease on it. I have all the disassembly line videos for a number of pens. That takes some time and effort, and in some pens it's very easy to disassemble them. In some pens you need specialized tools. Sometimes the pen comes with a tool, but often it is not. Sometimes those are aftermarket things. For example, Mont Blanc, you can use tools that you can buy on eBay, for example, or on there are different companies. Pen Tooling, for example, is a good one that has a lot of these kinds of wrenches that you can purchase, and then you can open up pens that will void the warranty to your pen, so you have to really want to do that, but that gives you access to a piston mechanism, and as a result you can do that. I found that Pelican M800 and M1000s, you can disassemble the piston with a Twisby wrench, which is very nice because Twisbys are pretty affordable, so you can use that. Don't have to buy something super expensive. But again, you would be voiding warranty and all that kind of stuff, so you really have to want to do that. The final thing I wanted to address briefly is where do you get information? Where do you get information on pen repair? If this is something you wish to pick up, again, I've done this in the past when I got into pens, but when I figured out that vintage pens are not really my thing, I stopped doing that. I don't find it interesting. I certainly see how some people would find it very relaxing to tinker with pens and restoring that pen to its former glory and maybe selling it at a profit. I understand all that. It's just not really my thing, but that's why I stopped doing that. Where do you get information? Well, not from videos like these, because this is not a how to repair pens tutorial. I've just talked about some of the things that people can do, some of the things I've done, other things I've definitely not done. Of course, there is online, and these days the online world is massive. If you look at forums like Fountain Pen Network, there are threads dedicated to repair of specific pens, which is a great resource. If you're like me and you're a bit old-fashioned and you like a printed book, there is an outstanding book available by Jim Marshall and Dr. Lawrence Oldfield called Pen Repair, a very appropriate name. I had the second edition. It's currently in the fourth edition, and it's a wonderful spiral-bound book, so you can lay down flat on your desk as you're doing repairs. It has wonderful illustrations, photographs, etc., and it really shows how to do a lot of pen repairs on a lot of specific pen models. But I found, again, I have owned that book, I found that by reading it attentively, you actually pick up certain skills that generalize to other pens. Like how do you replace a sack? Well, if you can do it on this one pen, you can probably also do it on another type of pen with some minor modifications. That book, Pen Repair, is highly, highly recommended. Very complete. There is a Spanish translation of it as well, which is very neat. And I must say this, I once met Dr. Oldfield at a pen show. I complimented him on his wonderful book on pen repair, and he was the most wonderful, soft-spoken, modest man who I think was almost embarrassed that I complimented him. So very, very nice person. If you want to order that book, you can go through his website. If you just Google Lawrence Oldfield Pen Repair, you find his website straight away. He doesn't do repairs, but he just provides some material, and he also sells some tools. He sells the book. Dealing with him was that's how I ordered the book years ago. This is truly years ago. Wonderful person to deal with. Really, really nice. So there's that. That's a great resource. There are other books, and I feel terrible. I'm blanking on the name. I had another book that Rich Binder used to sell, where the book of Lawrence Oldfield and Jim Marshall focused a bit more on British pens. That book focused on a lot of American pens, also spiral bound. No photographs really, but line drawings, and I want to say the author of that book's first name was Frank, but I don't remember anything beyond that. So if you know what I'm talking about, please leave a comment. I would really appreciate it. I know if Richard Binden still sells the book. I should have checked that before I did the video. But anyway, that was a nice repair manual as well. And with those two books, I think you're really set up pretty well to start practicing. Now, the final thing I will say is you can also ask advice of people. Brian Anderson of Anderson Pens is a very experienced pen repair person who's done many difficult and complicated repairs on different types of pens. So there is that kind of expertise. You can run into him at pen shows. You can email him. You can go to his shop, obviously. So that's always an option. But the final word of warning I will say is that. Word of warning, vintage pens can be fragile, and you are likely to destroy a pen, or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10. This is how it is. You choose to do something to a fairly fragile object, and as a result, you could do more harm than good. This is how things work, and it's just something to be aware of. So if you truly want to do this, I would certainly assume this is an obvious thing to say, but I'll say it anyway. Start with very cheap pens. Get something beaten up on eBay for $15, $20. I have certainly done that, so I know it's possible. Start by resacking that, seeing what you get. You won't have a beautiful pen, but destroying that one mottled ebonite Waterman 52 is a massive shame. Maybe just go for a black hard rubber pen that you can get for $15, $20, $25, $30. Start with that, right? Again, I would assume that goes without saying. I hope this was useful. Thank you for the suggestion. If you would like me to talk about anything else pen related, leave a comment below and I will try to get to that video as soon as I can. I hope this was useful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll gladly see you later. Bye!